Today we have a distinguished panel to talk about bringing solutions to market for pediatrics and congenital heart disease. I'm Ashu Tandon. I'm the Vice Chair for Innovation at Cleveland Clinic Children's. And I got into this, these are my disclosures, I got into this mostly out of jealousy, which was that, okay, hold on. All right, so my inspiration for innovation, as I mentioned, was partially based on jealousy. So if you guys remember the movie Up, I watched that in 3D, and as a congenital cardiologist, I want to know what the 3D anatomy of the heart looks like. So I said, well, if I can watch a movie in 3D, why can't I see a heart in 3D? And I apologize about the videos not working. And then likewise, when we have echocardiograms or MRI images of the heart, we wanted to be able to see that in a 3D space. So one of the things that I did for that was me and a colleague, we tried to figure out how does the VR technologies work, how does the image processing work. We created a startup for that. Didn't pan out, but at least we tried. And then likewise, one of the other things that I learned as a fellow was there was a lot of remote patient monitoring occurring in the adult space. So yeah, sorry, this is the VR stuff. It's just taking a minute to load. So, sorry. Yikes. 1 second. So there was a lot of remote patient monitoring occurring on the adult side, right? We have Zio patches, we have a bunch of other kinds of technologies that are wearable, they're wireless, they last for a week, and there was a fair bit of work that was being done in trying to show reducing hospital readmission for patients with heart failure, identifying patients with heart failure, and we do home monitoring for babies with congenital heart disease, but how can we expand that beyond what we're already doing? So one of the other reason that I got involved with this innovation work was to figure out why are there not these solutions for patients with congenital heart disease or in the pediatric market. So how do we solve these problems in the real world, right? So why weren't technologies ready? Like why were we struggling in the pediatric and congenital space? So a lot of times I hear this answer, market size, market size, market size, right? And then the complexity of pediatric markets, complexity of healthcare in general, and then back to market size. So I think part of what we're trying to do today is talk about what some of these other opportunities are and how we get around some of these market size and complexity problems. And the other thing that I always get annoyed about is there's a lot of cool research that's out there, but it doesn't make it to clinical practice for our patients. So how do we bridge this gap between the academic side and the commercial side? So I just wanted to take a minute and talk a little bit about some of the national initiatives that exist and that exist at scale. So there's International Society for Pediatric Innovation. It's a group of physicians and other caregivers, which is basically a learning network of children's hospitals. KidsX is a program that's run out of CHLA, where children's hospitals vote on mostly digital health needs, and KidsX matches startups to those needs. The NIH, the FDA, American Academy of Pediatrics, and industry groups like AdvaMed are working to create a national clinical trials infrastructure for pediatric devices called ShipMD. That's gone on to the next stage called through the FNIH Public-Private Partnership. And then the American Academy of Pediatrics has a section on advanced therapies and technologies. So there are other national initiatives. We'll talk about one of the other ones with Dr. Espinoza today, which is this Pediatric Medical Device Consortia, which is an FDA-funded pediatric medical device incubator system, in essence. And it's run out of various children's hospitals around the country. And it gives money to companies and inventors to develop technologies, medical devices for pediatrics. So it has to be FDA regulated. But these, beyond just giving you money, they provide mentorship services, connections with the community. And so I think this is a great opportunity for all the industry partners here, if they have a pediatric use case, to learn about how this can support you. And then what can you do is think of problems you want to solve and do use-directed research and show up. I think that's the biggest thing, show up to things like this. So thanks for that. I'm going to invite our panel up, and they can introduce themselves. So, okay, well, here are our panel members. So. Yeah, it's a little rough. This way I can see everyone.
All right, that's good,
yeah. So, Dr. Espinosa, why don't you start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here and inviting me to be a part of it. So, my name is Juan Espinosa. I'm a general pediatrician and an informaticist by training. My day job is I'm the Chief Research Informatics Officer at Lurie Children's Hospital right here in Chicago. And my connection to this work in pediatric medical devices is I'm also the PI and director of one of the 5 FDA-funded pediatric device consortia. I run a program called CTIP that's been FDA-funded since 2013. In that time, we've evaluated over 500 distinct technologies, supported over 220 companies, helped bring 26 products to market, and in the last 5 years, helped our companies raise over $500 million in non-dilutive funding. In dilutive funding, and another 43 federal grants, mostly SBIRs, and Phase 1 and Phase 2, totaling about $36 million in non-dilutive funding. CTIP itself gives out non-dilutive funding. So far to date, we've done about $1.3 million in non-dilutive investing, as well as another $500,000 in indirect financial support. So helping our companies pay for services, paying for consultants, paying for services from other people to help them bring them to market. It's fun work. It's hard. It's challenging, but it's incredibly meaningful. And for the patients who now finally have technologies that were actually designed for them instead of repurposing adult devices, it makes all the difference in the world.
Thanks, Dr. Anand. Why don't you go next?
Sure. I'm Omar Anand. I'm a faculty member at Georgia Tech in electrical and computer engineering. I'm also co-founder of CardioSense, which has a booth kind of right over there, where we're building wearable technology as well as algorithms for, at first, patients with heart failure, so adults. And I have the distinct pleasure of being a collaborator with this gentleman over here with whom we've worked on wearable technology and algorithms for pediatrics, especially single ventricle and congenital heart defects, to be able to estimate cardiac output that we published on together, and we have some more fun work coming up, hopefully.
All right. Jonathan?
Hi, I'm Jonathan Bout. I'm a founder and CEO of the company Gabi Smart Care. We're currently collaborating with about 35 hospitals here in the US, and what Gabi Smart Care does is a remote patient monitoring platform exclusively developed and dedicated to children. So we took on this very big challenge to really focus on children and deliver great technologies to children.
And we're sorry, but Dr. Lawrence had a clinical commitment come up and wasn't able to make it today. So I think I talked a little bit about like the market size problem in pediatrics, right? And the resultant complexity with broad ranges of diseases that we have to take care of with smaller populations. So Jonathan, tell me a little bit about why you decided to do why you made Gabi for kids and how you've navigated a little bit of that so far.
Right, yeah. Well, that actually started with a personal experience. I have a daughter, and 7 days after birth, she's got a very, very strong infectious respiratory disease, very severe form. And in a couple of hours, she turned blue. She's been admitted to the ICU. She stayed there for a couple of weeks, no immunity, so that was terrifying. And when we left the hospital, I remember these physicians asking us to pay attention to specific symptoms. And honestly, as a parent, we just felt completely helpless. she's got some complications, she's been readmitted, and we just understand as parents why we wouldn't have that continuum of care for kids. And that's when, talking around me about that issue, I just realized that there was a real need for that population. And so we decided to bring the right technology to these children, realizing that there's a lot of very good technology for adults, but there's such big lack of innovation for kids. And that's how the adventure started.
So Omar, when you made CardioSense, you took your work from the lab and brought it to market, which is not what happens to most technologies that's in the lab. Why did you decide to do that? What was your struggle like on the adult side? Where are you with that now?
Yeah, well, we're not quite at market yet, right? But we're close.
You got a booth at AHA.
We're getting there. It's getting there.
Headed in the right direction.
It's a long process. It's a long process. I mean, for me, I think probably, so when I finished my PhD, my whole plan, my whole life was to go into academia. And then it turned out there was this guy that I knew at Stanford who was a mechanical engineer, and his dad passed away suddenly, actually, of a heart attack, and he had to take over the company, and it was a pro audio company. So when I first finished grad school, instead of going to academia, I became basically CTO of this pro audio company, and we built a lot of really cool products. We actually, Shure, who builds this microphone, distributed our tiny microphones that were used for Broadway theaters, for Hollywood films, and kind of Disney theme parks, like all over the place. So I kind of had to lead the development of products from idea all the way to where it was actually deployed, where we went to trade shows and presented them and that kind of thing, and it was exciting. So for me, it was a matter of time that when I started at Georgia Tech, I wanted for sure to at least have the chance to get the stuff that we're doing out there into market. And the experience that you have where something actually becomes a product and it can, in fact, impact someone's life and also become a source of income for many of the people who build it and sell it and all of those sort of jobs along the way. I think that's an important part of what we do. And I think, it should be a bigger part, actually, of research overall is the translational side of things.
So, Juan, tell us, you described the success of the CTIP so far in terms of being able to support 200 plus companies with direct funding. What is that? Tell us more about the PDC program and how it can help these companies make stuff for kids.
Yeah, so the PDC program was passed into law in 2007. The first round of funding happened in 2009, and essentially it was part of the Safer Medical Devices Act for Kids, which included this provision of how do we accelerate technologies that are designed explicitly for children. Right. One of the things that we deal with a lot in pediatrics is off-label use of devices, and so uncertain risk-benefit analysis because that's not how the devices were designed or studied. And so the idea of the PDC program is to create these centers of excellence that have resources and skills to help innovators go from concept to commercialization, as long as they are supporting a device that is FDA regulated, and B, that is intended for use in pediatric populations, which the FDA under CDRH defines as 0 to 21.
And is that including software as a medical device options now, given the new rules that the FDA has put in place?
Yeah, absolutely. As long as it's regulated by CDRH, we can support. We can also support combination products as long as the CDRH or the device component, what they call the primary mechanism of action, is a device. Then we can also support those. So as long as CDRH is where this is going, then the PDCs can be involved. And our support is always non-dilutive, right? So for the CTIP, our program, and all the other ones, we do not make a claim on anyone's IP. We do not take equity. Really, our goal is that making the marketplace have more options for children that were, again, designed, that are proven to be safe and efficacious for children.
And Jonathan, I think you've gotten PDC support in the past. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Gabi SmartCare has the chance to be supported by CTIP, indeed. And we are supported as well by a few other organizations. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there are like 5 right now in the US. Yeah, so we have a relationship with the 5 PDCs, absolutely. Yeah, and they've been a great support for, getting the FDA clearance. That was definitely a big one, and then getting access to a network as well, because all these PDCs are connected with each other, and so connected with a lot of different hospitals behind it too. So that was a very good help.
Yeah, and Jonathan highlights that, what's nice about the PDC program is that we're not in competition with each other. So companies can absolutely get, each of our teams. So there's 5 PDCs. One's based at Texas Children's, ours based here in Chicago, one at UCSF Stanford, one at Children's National, and one based in the Midwest PDC, which is based at Nationwide. It involves all of the major academic medical centers in Ohio, and we all work together, and each of us have slightly different expertise. So it's nice for companies like Gabi SmartCare to work with CTIP on their reimbursement strategy and work with Children's National on their regulatory strategy, and again be able to access the network of collaborators, of researchers, of business partners that you can access from all of those. And so it's really been, we like to think of it as it's a big tent approach, right? There's a huge need to support this particular industry, and we are open to anybody who wants to be a part of that community that wants to help move this forward.
So Amar, if you wanted to bring CardioSense technology to kids, what do you think? How is that? How would that work? Because most of the companies here are adult focused for the reasons that we've been describing at the beginning of the talk.
I mean, with CardioSense, I haven't thought about it, but we've done pre-subs on another technology we were developing for detecting IV infiltrations. And it seemed to me like the interaction with the FDA, if anything, is smoother in the pediatric space, maybe because of those reasons you outlined. They don't want to create another barrier. I mean, it was, I would think in our case, it would be really, what's the indication? What's the business case? It still has to, make sense. But I think that we're pursuing CardioSense right now. Our software, PCWP analysis software, as an adjunctive aid for a heart failure clinician to be able to evaluate a patient with HFrEF or heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. I could imagine that, for example, what we've discussed. I don't know how much of that we can talk publicly. We've written papers about it. So the concept of being able to, let's say, provide another piece of data that a clinician could use to be able to detect low cardiac output syndrome, that may be an interesting possibility for a first case. And then the studies kind of make sense where it's a tool claim that can then be used basically in conjunction with all the other information that's out there to make a better decision. I think what's really tough is when companies really seek these AI kind of indications that are really sort of speculative, broad, predictive, it's going to do everything. I think it starts becoming more difficult. So maybe that would be a first step.
And how did, when you were looking at the HFrEF use case, right, how did you decide that was the case for you? Was it market size? Was it your technology? Was it all of the above? How was that the place you started?
It started with our first breakthrough. So we got breakthrough device designation. And in those discussions, actually, the FDA wanted us to focus on HFrEF only because it had to be a life-threatening condition, and they, for some reason, felt like HFpEF was not, I guess.
But
I don't know. But HFrEF
isn't, or HFpEF
no, HFrEF
isn't?
was.
Right.
So I don't know. So the indication had to kind of focus on that, and maybe it was more nuanced than that. That's just what I remember. At the same time, if you look at the data, we found, from a data science perspective, that it was. It's a very heterogeneous group in HFpEF, right? It's kind of defined more by what it's not than what it is. And it makes it difficult from the signal standpoint to get really good data that kind of, forms a story as clearly as it did for us with HFrEF, where we could really see that, the model's paying attention to portions in the signal that really make sense from a physiological perspective. And so I think all of the above, I guess, to some extent. From a business case, it would be better if it worked for both, right? Bigger market.
Yeah, so open to anyone. How can we encourage more companies to make things for kids? I mean, Jonathan, you did you had a personal story that drove you to that corner. How can we, and if Angie was here, I was going to have her talk about Action Network and some of the work that she's doing to reduce the barriers to clinical trials in kids. I mentioned the public-private partnership with the foundation of the NIH that's working on trying to create some of that infrastructure as well. But I think, what I've run into so far is hospitals are rarely willing to cede any of their regulatory, legal, contracting ability to control that. And if we're talking about smaller populations and kids, you will need multi-center trials to get, you could do a 1,000-patient study at Emory, but you can't do a 1,000-patient study at Cleveland Clinic Children's or at, Lurie for most kind of congenital heart diseases. So what should we as a community be thinking about? How can we make this more accessible? Maybe one you want to...
Yeah, so I think... So there's a couple of different ways to attack this issue. Fundamentally, I think pediatric medical devices is a market failure. I realize that is a depressing thought, but it's true, almost by definition, right? There is a clear and overwhelming public health need that the private sector has not solved. Why has the private sector not solved it? Well, there are neither the financial incentives nor the regulatory requirements to solve it. And so, like any other market failure, that you have to have the carrots and sticks to address it. And it's something that we haven't done well in devices. I think we've done better in drugs and biologics. PREA and the BPCA, which were legislations passed by Congress in the early 2000s, completely changed the financial incentive mechanisms and the requirements to force the private sector to explore pediatric technologies. There's no analog for that in devices.
Yeah.
So, but that's going to take a long time, right? That's going to take advocacy, working with legislators, working with regulatory bodies to both design and create those things. And it took years, the advocacy behind PREA and BPCA to bring those forward. And honestly, industry were some of the staunchest opponents. But, the companies that are sponsors here, they're doing just fine. So clearly developing products for children didn't impact their bottom line. And so, and in the same way, the med tech industry has been resistant to more, again, both incentives and requirements for pediatric focus. But I think we have to start by recognizing that it's a market failure and by addressing the foundational pieces in the meantime, because that's going to take a while. I think it's reducing the cost. Right? If you think about, I'll go back to drugs versus devices. Drugs are a 10x vehicle, right? For an investor. These are true, venture fundable initiatives. Devices, and most device companies, setting aside, the Medtronics, Abbott, Stryker, and Covidians of the world, are essentially, they operate like small businesses. They're not 10x return businesses. They're 1.5, 2x, 3x returns. And so I think we have to separate, just because they're all tech and attractive and shiny and new, they're not the same kinds of vehicles. Drugs and biotechs are a different kind of vehicle than investing in a medtech. Medtech this is a 10-year investment with a 3x return. So I think educating investors and the financial sector about what it means to invest in health tech is critical, and then we have to reduce the cost and the time. Imagine trying to start a small business, right? Something that's going to run kind of at the scale of a successful local restaurant chain or an insurance company, insurance broker, I should say. But being told, okay, great, but you're going to need $100 million in 5 years before you can go to market and make your first dollar. That's crazy. And so if we can reduce the cost of the trials, the cost of regulation, the cost of the marketing and commercialization plan, then those are things that we can start knocking down individual barriers to entry for companies until we have a legislative and regulatory foundation that really drives it at scale.
go ahead.
No, go ahead. I've been talking.
Yep, it's
Go.
okay,
Go. Yeah.
fine. So, yeah, I think I just would like to highlight what is already in place right now to actually attract companies to do some things for pediatrics. It's like, you were talking about FDA clearance from a regulatory as such, but the FDA clearance today is actually free for pediatrics. So, the FDA doesn't charge companies to get the FDA clearance, and that's already, a big thing now. FDA experts, so that costs a huge amount of money. If you want to do that right, then obviously, you need to spend money there, but at least there's a step, that is done on that way. So that's one thing. Now, another thing is that in the pediatric space, there is almost no competition because there's such a low level of innovation that actually some companies have entered from the pediatric market to get into the adult market afterwards. So I think from a go-to-market standpoint, I think that's interesting as well. Avoiding the adult market where a very small company would just be amongst the noise and wouldn't perform at all, just starting by pediatrics and then growing into the adult space. I think that's a very good thing to be done. Now, my perception of what can be done additionally just to attract people to build and innovate in the pediatric space is, for us, the main barriers were finding the right business model. So the cost is definitely one thing, right? Especially in devices, you said. I mean, that's totally true. But then beyond that, I think business model-wise, trying to understand who you deliver value to, how can you be paid? Because everyone talks about reimbursement, but is it actually the right way to go, right? Because when you talk about pediatrics, then it's not Medicare. It becomes Medicaid, and Medicaid has a level of reimbursement that is lower. So how do you actually make money of this, and how, who actually benefit from the value that you deliver? And I think this is still something that needs to be figured out. Is like there's not a lot of experts from a go-to-market standpoint that can actually help companies to identify what the value is really delivered and how you can put your business model together. I think this is one of the main things that is really slowing down, I would say, the penetration of the company, or the success of the company that decide to innovate in the pediatric space.
I mean, for me, I guess I'll just say a couple things. So one is, I think on the research side, it's really tough to get solid amounts of grant money to do work in this area, as we know, right? Eunice Shriver has one of the toughest pay lines of all of the NIH institutes, what I think one thing that's a great opportunity now is the ARPA-H, right? That this is a wonderful thing that actually. It's an agency that wants to take some risks, want to push new devices for new areas, and that may make a difference on the research side. On the tail end, on translation, I think that, mission-driven VCs are really, needed in this space and probably exist, and I don't know enough about it for pediatrics, but for example, for us, on the CardioSense side, we have Laerdal Million Lives Fund, which I think, obviously has a huge presence here as well. And they have a mission of saving 1 million lives by 2026. And I think because of that, they may look at technologies from a different light. Besides, of course, the financial model is really important too, but can it save many lives? If there's a mission-driven fund that's, can we save, kids with heart disease and allow them to have better quality of life and less mortality, then maybe the dollars and cents aren't the only thing that enter the equation, and you can get things funded easier on the commercial side.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point towards mission-driven funding, right? There are plenty of foundations founded by, parents of kids who have congenital heart disease and things like that, but their focus has mostly been on the research end.
Yeah.
I think there are some, but not a ton, of focused pediatric-specific or rare disease-specific or whatever venture funds or angel funds or, somewhere in that early stage of business development. And I think that would, as we try to find that network between the PDCs and other groups, of finding who are the people that we can pair companies with to these mission-driven funds so that they're not being graded on are you going to solve severe aortic stenosis in adults, which is a 50 to 100x bigger market. All right, so we have just a couple minutes left. Any closing thoughts, Jonathan?
Well, like that, no, not specifically, no. I think the pediatric space, and certainly the congenital heart defect patients, because that's really what we're talking about here in single ventricle, there's so much advancement, progress that needs to be done on this population, and I just wish that more companies would just invest in that and really develop solutions in here. And I think what I really like about this, though, is like we see a lot of interest from all these pediatric hospitals in the US that are very attracted to innovate in that space. There's really some consortia of all these hospitals and specialists like you, actually, Ashu, that are really involved in this mission, and that's very, very good to see. And without you, we couldn't really move forward in this population. So,
Mark.
Closing comment for me, I guess, is maybe I'm going to echo that a little bit, especially with you. I mean, not just you, but really almost all of my pediatric collaborators, pediatric rheumatology, cardiac ICU, and nurses, like people who work and devote their lives to making basically kids healthier are, no surprise, probably some of my favorite collaborators out of anybody, and they are mission driven. And I think it makes it so that you can have really great intellectual dialogue and creative collaborations that are really productive. So thank you for working with me. But yeah.
I'll build on that a little. Because I don't want to scare anybody away from the pediatric space with my comments. I think it's important to have a critical eye as to what is the current state of the field. That said, if you think about there's only adults here. Think about the type of care that your children receive. Think about how your pediatricians, how your pediatric specialists, how nurses, how they treat children. Think about how your doctors treat you. I think everyone deserves the type of care that we deliver every day in pediatrics. Adults should be so lucky. And I think in the same way that we design technologies with this for children that are holistic, that consider the child, the family, the home environment, school, adults deserve that too. And I think if we can take the way that we approach delivering meaningful care to children, to everyone, that is good for everyone. And so focusing on pediatric innovation is really just focusing on better, kinder, more comprehensive innovation. And I think if we can take that across the industry, then I think we all win.
Awesome. Well, we're out of time, but thank you, all three of you, so much. This was excellent. And yeah, all right. Well, I know we have another panel coming up right now. So thank you. Thanks, everyone.